Confidence is key is a quote that invokes confidence in everyone, from young adults to high schoolers to people in the workplace. As high schoolers, we require lots of confidence to come to school every day and face each other. First impressions matter. As a first impression, we usually see each other's clothes or appearances, and that's a good thing. It's important to have a good appearance and be well dressed for things like presentations, meetings, or interviews. As high schoolers, though, we put an unnecessary amount of emphasis on how we should look. We value appearance over our education and what we should be learning in high school. Because of this, we have seen a significant mental health decline. The World Health Organization conducted a thing in which they found that 1 in 7 10 to 19-year-olds have a mental health disorder. This isn't helped by our access to 21st century technology, where we can search anything up or contact anyone by just having a phone in our pocket. Social media. Social media is the main issue of this because it allows us to compare ourselves to other people that maybe isn't even true. In this presentation, we will present the problems that are created by social media and our peers. We'll address the mental health effects of appearances and comparison, and we'll finally give solutions for us as high schoolers and as future parents. Our question is, how do appearances influence others' opinions and interactions of others in high school?
Alright, so in high school we have all faced challenges like friendships, family time, jobs, extracurriculars, school and homework, and other issues. So recently in a Harvard study done by Rita Hamad, she discovered that poor mental health rose about 10% in 10 years. Also, throughout our lives, we all face prejudices based on our appearances. And so in my research, I found that stereotypes were developed by judging somebody's race, gender, or social class. And in Evan's research, he found that clothing and fashion, as well as physical appearance and beauty standards, influence stereotypes as well. In Brendan and Abby's research, stereotypes can be detrimental to self-identity, relationships, and mental health. And in one of my sources too, Body Image by Lange, she found that others' interactions affect one's self-concept. And so recently, the drop we see in mental health needs to be addressed or it will worsen. And so that leads us to our main issue, which is mental health. And so high school development and mental health will deteriorate when comparison and prejudices are not solved. This issue has been around since our grandparents and parents were alive and in high school. And a couple of perspectives that we use are social, environmental, economic, political, and scientific, and due to recent drops in mental health, this needs to be contained.
So for the solutions, we have number 1, better treatment of children by teachers, parents, and peers through training and environment changes. And for number 2, we have limits on social media and outreach to high schoolers about mental health, and that can be through laws or just limits on through the school itself.
So how to implement our solutions? We recommend that we should improve how children are treated by adult authority figures and their peers. And Dr. Chuban at Psychology Today found when adult authority figures make biased assumptions toward a teen, it will affect their discipline opportunities and emotional health. So when we judge solely on appearance, we label them, and this person can get trapped in these stereotypes. A great visual example of this is actually High School Musical, because the main character, Troy, he's like a basketball star, but he wants to go out for the musical, but because he's stuck in this stereotype of being a basketball player athlete, he cannot go out for the musical, and then the entire movie is just him having a mental breakdown about not being able to go out for the play. So, and this kind of shows that when students are forced and labeled with these stereotypes, it will limit their creativity and their opportunities. And Professor Schultz of Pittsburgh University found that when we have informed parents, they will empower their kids. So thinking back to High School Musical, the main person who's kind of holding back Troy was his own father, who did not want him to go out for the musical. So we recommend that classes be made locally available, either at like rec centers or libraries, and that these classes be low cost or free ideally, and that they teach parents with children of all ages how to help their child succeed by creating an environment where they encourage self-expression and new experiences, and this will help create students who feel valued, respected, and confident. And then how to implement our other solution is placing limitations on social media while increasing mental health opportunities. So limits on how minors use social media. Multiple psychologists have proven that social media will lead to anxiety, jealousy, and even depression in some people. And a lot of political parties and governments have taken notice of this issue. And Colorado legislator just passed 2 new laws called the Colorado Privacy Act and the Social Media Tools for Minors. And what these acts do is it makes it illegal for social media platforms to market and collect data from minors. And it's basically what that means is kind of like curation to your feed in order to like get a curated feed. They collect data from you, so that'll make it like a little bit legal to do that. So that's why your feed may not be as curated anymore. And we hope that the government is hoping that it'll make it more positive and empowering content for minors. And then they are also trying to pass screen limit laws where minors cannot access social media past 10 p.m. or limit social media, I think it's to 1 to 2 hours. And we recommend that other states follow suit and they pass the same time restriction laws. And then we recommend that other schools like Blue Eye as a mental health counselor, and they create an environment where it is like encouraged to go see this mental health counselor, or that it becomes mandatory where everyone has to go see the counselor for like 10 minutes during their school day. And we believe that these are important steps helping teens live a life not defined by likes and help prevent students from more emotional harm and will encourage healthier development during this critical stage of life.
Okay, and for our solutions, we have pros and cons. For solution number 1, for the pros, students can feel valued, respected, and confident in themselves. And then children can get the support that they need without feeling ridiculed. And then some other ones for solution number 1 would be increased mental and emotional health, increased opportunities, and a decrease in discipline issues. And then for solution number 2, you have a decrease in anxiety, jealousy, and depression, and it reduces comparison. And it also encourages healthy habits and helps protect minors' privacy. And then some cons, and a lot for the cons and limitations, a lot of this is just human nature. And so for solution number 1, a con is going to be that it requires time and resources to train teachers and parents and everything that they need to know. And then there's the principle of high expectations, which is when good expectations are set on children, they can have a much better performance and outcome than they would have had if they had lower expectations. But if these are put in place and children are getting better opportunities, if parents have low expectations on their kids, just because out of a fear that they might hurt them, the kids will learn to grow up lazy and give up if problems look too hard. And then for solution number 2, people can lie about their age with the content restrictions. And then the other one for option number 2 is that when a restriction is created, people are going to be made to bypass the laws, and it completely defeats the purpose of the restrictions. And then for the limitations, for number 1, peer influence is just hard to control in general. It's kind of always there, but through these solutions, we're hoping it will be better. And then there's always going to be a social expectation set by peers unconsciously that can damage the self-esteem of students. And then for limitation number 2, laws might discourage people from bypassing the limits, but it won't completely get rid of it. And then people can hack content limits.
As you have seen today, there are major implications that go along with beauty, whether that be physical maturity or the way one represents themselves by the way they wear. Testimonies from scientists, psychologists, and perspective on teens themselves have shown a direct correlation between objectification and a decline in mental health. When appearance is made the focus, evidence has shown subjects experience stress and a loss in self-confidence. All sides agree we are facing a major mental health crisis today. Our research leads us to conclude that objectification, primarily through social media, is directly responsible for the harm done to young men and women across the world. So what can be done? What should be done? What lengths should we go to protect the lives of those who have the potential to be harmed by objectification? We propose two possible solutions. First, heavily restrict social media content available to teens and minors. And second, educate parents, teachers, and teens themselves on how to create a safe and encouraging environment. Undoubtedly, there will be retaliation and unforeseen consequences with the restriction of social media. But are not the lives of young men and women worth the backlash? I leave that question for you to answer. Thank you.
Okay, Evan. Describe an argument from one of your peers, IRRs, that made you think differently about your team's solution or conclusion.
Oh yeah, so Brendan. Oh, you know what? So Abby talked about like her whole lens was like on environment, and when I saw that, I was like, I don't want to do environment because how are you going to talk about like nature and stuff? And then Abby showed us her IRR, and actually it was about like the environment around the person and what can affect them and what they affect. So it was like a different perspective on something I didn't even realize. So it's like pretty cool.
Thank you. Brooke. Reflecting on your colleagues' work, which one had the greatest impact on your overall understanding of the problem your group identified?
So I think that Brendan had the greatest impact. He mainly focused on social media, which is like the leading impact of our issue with mental health, and it causes like comparison, stress, and anxiety.
Here. Taylor. How did your group decide to include Evan's perspective into the overall presentation?
Evan's perspective?
Mm-hmm.
His perspective was a lot on like fashion and how that affects how people are like treated according to appearances, and a lot with social media. People put on like their best self and their best best clothes, best outfits, best fashion, and that can have a lot of impact on how teens are, like how they compare themselves with what kind of brands they have.
Thank you. Abby, if you had another team member, what other perspective or limitation could they have researched that would have made a useful contribution to the project?
I would have loved to see like a health or well-being like lens. To look at kind of like the physical, like the actual physical. We talk a lot about mental health, and I would have loved to see like how it affects like physical health, because I have heard of like instances where like severe like comparison can make people like physically sick, like stomach issues. So I would have loved to like explore more on that topic.
Thank you. And Brendan, what is an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' individual reports that you decided to exclude from the presentation, and why?
So one of the reports that was very well written that I enjoyed reading and that really contributed was Evan's. Unfortunately, he moved in a direction that we decided as a team wasn't really the way we wanted to go with this presentation. He primarily focused on the economic lens, so the ideas of big business and stuff, and that as a team we decided we wanted to focus more on mental health and then social media instead of the fashion industry.
You're walking into school on a day like any other. The hallway smells faintly like cleaning and something warm from the cafeteria, as the building is filled with the uneven rhythm of slamming locker doors. Backpacks brush against your shoulders as you turn in the direction of your first period class. It's a day like any other, boring, ordinary, predictable, until you notice a small paper poster hanging on the door of your classroom. Your eyes take a moment to make out the figure of a man. It's an ugly and jeering picture with a cartoonish figure with exaggerated features. You quickly realize that it's representing the Jewish population when you see the Star of David in the bottom right corner of the poster. Next to this symbol are big bold letters. Poison it, it reads, behind the enemy powers stands the Jew, exterminated. You read it again, hoping you misunderstood, and then again. But you didn't. The poster's message is clear and unapologetic. You shake your head, telling yourself that this isn't real. After all, nobody ever paid attention to the school posters anyways, so why should you care? Propaganda doesn't make a difference, and it never has. Or has it? This was the unfortunate reality for hundreds of children in Germany at the beginning of the 1920s. People told themselves that propaganda wouldn't make a difference, but less than 15 years later, the victims of these hateful posters were being sentenced to death in concentration camps across the country. If this isn't obvious to you already, this alone shows that propaganda makes a huge difference and, if not handled correctly, can lead to the mass execution of its victims. But what exactly is propaganda? Simply put, propaganda is the spreading of biased, misleading information, images, or rumors designed to persuade public opinion. For our TMP research report, we decided to dive into the impact and causes of propaganda and how specifically it can affect an adolescent's brain development. So our research report question was, how has the historical use of media-driven othering shaped modern political messaging towards adolescents? And we reviewed this with historical, sociological, political, and media lenses. We defined otherness as the process in which groups distinguish themselves from others, whom they devalue, often creating a dichotomy between the self and the other. And this is often helped by the historical constraints and also the cultural biases of the time period. But this is nothing new. Speaking from a historical lens, I'm able to tell you that propaganda has been around for thousands of years, with early carvings dating back in Iran and Greece to even 480 BC. Propaganda has been around for a long time. And from the racist anti-Chinese ads paralleling the Chinese Exclusion Acts of 1882, to the Rwandan radio broadcasts in the 1990s that led to the horrific Tutsi genocide, to the famous anti-Semitic posters foreshadowing the Holocaust, propaganda is proven throughout history to have horrific and dramatic impacts. The ways in which propaganda have been used by hate groups have varied, as has the ways that they have been perceived by the audiences. Lydia, speaking from a media lens, is going to tell us a little bit more about that.
Following Cairo's historical lens, we see from a literary and media lens how otherness is defined in communities and in nations and in other certain groups. For example, otherness shown in media directly influences young adults. Like Cairo was speaking about history, we see media here today still influencing what we have as a community now. It influences race, gender, politics, and morality, and because of that, people starting from a young age can grow up because of this desensitization found in media. And so what does media and otherness have in correlation with each other? According to Sharma Moria and Singh, 2005, media created moral panic describes the emotional and behavioral reactions to perceived crisis or threat that is exaggerated and often sensationalized by the media. Because of this, we see how it's directly influencing people. It's not just something that's behind the backgrounds, it's something that is very directly forward. Just like the propaganda that Kyra mentioned in her historical, we can see that propaganda happening in the media and how the moral panic theory, which describes how media is very perceived for a person's feelings and emotions instead of giving the factual truth, we see how that also influences young adults today. There are other events also shown in media because in the past we see it historically like the Holocaust, and she was talking about the Jews now we see abortion and other political issues rising up. Because of this, we can understand that it's not just the young people who are affecting what we see in the media today, but also the people in positions of authority, and those are directly affecting how we see things online and even in the world today. There are problems seen within, and the main problem that I found when I was researching this media and literary lens was how the solutions were found in addressing the political media, and how media withdrawal is found in too much, moral withdrawal is found in too much media consumption. So if we take in too much media, then we see how, even though the media addresses issues such as minorities and teachers and immigration and all that kind of stuff, we see how it can also be negatively impacted, because the theory says that it influences the emotions rather than influencing the truth. Now Rachel will talk about the sociological impacts and how it affects adolescents and their self-identity, and how their society can also reintroduce otherness today.
Okay, continuing on, Lydia focused on mainly what is happening now, which makes me wonder, where do these beliefs come from, and why do we believe some things we see on the media while other people may not? To dive into the sociology behind this, I went back to our roots. Our morals start to develop as early as 3 years old. And because of this, we can take that our adults in our lives are our first glimpse of how to treat other people and how we should, and who we should consider other. So society assigns value based on look, belief, and perspective, which then creates stereotypes. We use these stereotypes to decide which groups we should like and which groups we shouldn't like. And to get rid of this, we should ultimately teach our children how to treat other people from the very start. Adolescence is a key period of identity formation, meaning that whether we admit it or not, our elders are our first glimpse of how to treat other people. The attachment theory states that we often make the same decisions as those in authority of us because of the close bond between a child and a caregiver. Throughout adolescence, we develop the morals that we live by, which means that despite what others think, when we make quick decisions, we ultimately use our emotional and reasoning systems to decide between equal value decisions. Othering ultimately increases when we value self-interest over empathy. We put ourselves first and others second as humans, which is the reason why we have issues with propaganda and othering throughout media. Now JL talks about the historical lens. Political lens, I mean. She goes through how political leaders impact us and our morals and beliefs. They show us different things on propaganda in media that ultimately impact our decisions.
Through looking at a political lens, we can see that otherness is mostly created by personal ethics and then what political leaders, like their tactics. So for example, lots of political leaders use psychological methods like moral framing and ambiguity to avoid accountability for their answers, and that sways lots of people's judgment and decision making when knowing right and wrong. And a lot of these methods simplify complex problems, and it makes people think in ways that are more emotionally biased than critically. And lots of these tricks many people don't understand these tricks and notice them, and that also sways their moral judgments. We can also see lots of moral absolutes that political leaders put, which again sways emotional versus critical thinking. And their ambiguity also takes away from their accountability, therefore they can get away with many things and create polarization of groups and exclusion. And Lau, a professor at the University of Amsterdam, said that when people feel excluded, they're less likely to take accountability for their answers and feel the need to challenge political leaders. And this creates lots of control, warps judgment, and unethical behaviors. so we can see how it manipulates and creates division across people in a political standpoint. And in total, like, we can see how otherness narrows moral ethics and shapes correct judgment. And we can only see change if we ignore, accept, or challenge these points of view. So many of our implications were shaped by how morality is shaped by identity and power, and challenging narratives disrupts polarization and awareness and equals resistance. And Lydia will talk about our conclusion.
So our conclusion was really centered around media and adolescence, and how it usually starts, because Rachel was talking about, her research was showing how development starts at a young age. And so we decided to enforce a curriculum that directly talks about media and other politics and teaches about media safety too and monitoring social media. Because since that's the most important part of today's, now in today, the modern age, it makes sense that we should directly, talk about that and talk about the kids and the other generations. So when they rise up, then the political leaders and all those people who are in charge, they can have the right ethical standards of otherness and to make the right decisions and make the right morals. So we want to focus on the classrooms and education, and that's how we would address otherness.
From different lenses to fully understand.
Great, thank you. Lydia, reflecting on your colleagues' work, which one had the greatest impact on your overall understanding of the problem your group identified?
For me, I think the most impactful lens for me was Rachel's impact, because it specifically talked about how we can find a solution to our question, but in the nowadays. So if we found a solution, we wanted to find a solution, it would be in Rachel's research, which was talking about the sociological and adolescence and just growth and development of generations, So directly influencing that, I would think that Rachel's was the lens.
Great, thank you. Kyra, if you had another team member, what other perspectives or limitations could they have researched that would have made a useful contribution to the project?
I don't know if this is exactly a lens, but if I could pick another lens, I'd do a futuristic lens, because all of our research, Rachel's was kind of the why behind the what, and mine was more the what, and I looked at all of the historical events of propaganda. And by looking at historical events, I only really, the most recent one I looked at was probably the Rwandan genocide in the 1990s and stuff. And so having stuff that was more futuristic probably would have been better.
Great, thank you. And Rachel, how did your group decide to include another group member's lens into the overall presentation?
I think we included each person's lens in different ways. We used Kyra's to go back to look at the past and how it's impacted our now. And then we used JL's political to look at how our leaders shape our identity and how their influence can greatly change what we think. And then we used mine to go back and look at our roots and why we believe what we believe and where those beliefs come from. And then we used Lydia's media lens to bring our question together and have our question ultimately be able to talk about the media and what we see online and what we believe.
Great, thank you very much.
Studied how conformity has damaged and changed music. So what should we know before we begin? So conformity is the act of being influenced by a larger group and making your behavior similar to that larger group. I got this exact definition from Oxford Language on Google. There are two types of conformity that we really want to narrow in on. The first one is normative conformity, which is conforming for the majority. And the second one is informative conformity, which is conforming because of a lack of knowledge. The majority knows something that you don't, so you conform to their knowledge even if it's wrong. So there are a few studies that show this type of effect. Our first one from this guy, where he had participants sit in a room with a bunch of fake participants, and they stared at a dot, and periodically they were asked if the dot had moved, and all the fake participants were told to say yes, it had moved, even though it hadn't. And this study showed that even though the dot had never moved, and even though the people knew that the dot had never moved, they still conformed to the majority. There was a second study done that basically tried to fix the first study done, and this study, years later, tried to do the same thing but with lines. So they were given one line and they said, okay, which line is this line, A, B, or C? And the majority, which were fake participants, said, oh yeah, it was A, or oh, it was C. And even though they were wrong, one in every three people groups conformed to these fake people who were being confidently wrong. This is a visual demonstration. Those are the fake people, and then there would have one participant or two participants that were real, that were used to see if they were going to conform. So our takeaways, conformity, the definition of conformity is just making your behavior or your decisions fit majority behavior or decision. Normative is conforming with the majority, while informative is conforming with the majority's knowledge. There are early studies done through the 1900s that prove this point, and conformity basically has an invisible pull on the mind, which can really affect how people create music.
Okay, so I will be talking about the loss of cultural authenticity within the music industry as a result of conformity. So where is this seen in society? Society sees this within politics and race and social media. People conform with politics. They will choose a certain side and almost conform themselves to have all of the ideas of that certain side without fully understanding each of them. And in terms of race, people will associate themselves with this kind of identity, even if they aren't from a certain place. Just because of their race, they'll assume themselves with this kind of identity. And in social media, people follow trends and they do their best to try and fit in. So where is this seen in the music industry? Specifically with the punk genre, there are these kind of genre restrictions. If you don't make a specific kind of music, you would have been thrown out. And there were these requirements for success. Big bands like Blink-182 kind of paved the way for smaller bands that came after them. And they made it so if you didn't act or make the same music or dress the same kind of way as them, then you wouldn't be famous. And the people that did really did succeed. It was this kind of piggybacking off of each other. And I'll be giving a demonstration of the difference between those who follow conformity and those who break away from it. The first song is Suburban Home by Descendants, and the second song is Eye of the Tiger by Survivor. Two songs released in 1982, and the biggest difference that I can see between the two is within the lyrics. Suburban Home talks about how the idea of the American dream is basically a far-fetched idea, and it's not really attainable, and it's basically criticizing the idea. And Eye of the Tiger is basically about unwavering determination, and that's about it. And why is conformity an issue? Conformity is an issue because you lose your individuality. You conform to this idea and you lose what makes you unique. And you conform based on all of these pressures that society brings upon you, around you. And my evidence for on my topic is Rolling Stones and this pop duo, and they said about how people were upset when they would break away from conformity. And so my takeaways are how individuality is lost when you conform, and social media is responsible for this in modern times, and how there were these requirements in a lot of music genres for success. So.
All right, so I'm gonna talk about the solutions to Joey's problem that he discussed about the loss of authenticity in the music industry. So the first solution we decided on right there, part one, is practicing resistance, active resistance to conformity in music. And then part two of that solution, it's a two-part solution, is encouraging authenticity in the creation of authentic music. And then the second solution that we decided on was paying artists to break the musical standard that we find with conformity. All right, so part one of our solution, practicing resistance to conformity in the music genre. So this starts with realizing what you're actually listening to, because with algorithms and AI playlists and AI mixers and streaming platforms, a lot of times we don't even realize what we're listening to a lot of the time. AI and artificial intelligence has played a major role in creativity in the music genre and in all of creative art and everything in our lives. And we can see that in the music industry. We see that AI has influenced lyrics, has influenced song structures, and there are even AI-generated artists that are getting millions of streams that are topping Billboard charts, and this is a major problem because creativity is dying because of this. Part 2, encouraging authenticity. This is a positive reaction, not a negative reaction like the last one. The positive reaction is encouraging authenticity. So this is finding artists that actively break the mold of conformity and helping those artists and encouraging their authenticity. So we can do this by finding these local artists and sharing the music. We can go to local concerts, we can buy merchandise, there are monetary benefits. We can help these artists and therefore offset the conformity standard in popular culture and in the music industry. There's evidence of this in psychology because positive reinforcement has been shown to be much more effective than negative reinforcement. We can see that positive reinforcement increases the responsiveness from 9% to 86%. Now that's a massive leap, and we can see that monetary rewards, praise, positive reinforcement in general helps this tremendously. Solution 2 is paying artists not to use conformity. So this is a simple thing. Artists meet parameters such as not using AI, such as breaking the conformity, and they get money from that, monetary compensation. So this would be from not using AI, and then they get paid from that. It's a pretty simple idea, and it does have support with people enjoying, obviously, monetary compensation. Solution 1 has implications, such as encouraging other art forms and encouraging the culture in general to break out of that AI conformity. And then Solution 2 also has implications, such as money is the main motivator. Limitations. Solution 1 could be ineffective because there's no real monetary compensation, and then it also requires people to really buy into the incentive and to understand the goals that we have. And then Solution 2, the limits, money is corrupt and it can corrupt the music industry. And then where does the money come from? Does that come from the streaming platforms? Does that come from the labels themselves? We don't know, and that would have to be figured out in order for Solution 2 to be a viable option. We decided that Solution 1 would work best for our situation. This is because Solution 1, it's limited monetary resources needed, and it's proven by psychology to work. That's big because we know that it could work in similar situations.
To conclude, I'll be referring back to my teammates and what they said about conformity as in the definition of conformity, the problem with music, or conformity in music, and the solution with conformity in music. So, the definition. Conformity is given the definition of the behavior and adherence to socially accepted conventions or standards. Now, we can see conformity influence music genres such as punk, as in Joey said, and this could negatively influence music genres too. Now, we see the problem of less cultural, we see cultural conformity is a big problem, as well as AI being a big problem in music. As we see AI makes the uniqueness of music, as it makes it less, and we also see that cultural conformity also influences music and everyone has to have adherence to their genres and stick to their genres. Now, the solution to conformity in music would be to have active resistance, as Isaac said, to music. Now, when we have active resistance, we have to listen to people and what they say in music, and we also have to listen to their patterns or standards of music, and overall just listen to human-made music rather than AI. And why this solution works, as in Isaac said, it's proven by psychology, which means that it raises the responsiveness from 9.1% to 86%, as Isaac said, and it also, we don't have to pay the artists, but it also encourages artists to make more music and also encourages them as they have more reliance if we listen to more human artists rather than AI. Now, these are some of our works cited from our images, more images, and we have our information down here. And overall, thank you guys for listening to our presentation.
Think differently about your own individual research.
I used to think that a revolution wasn't really people-driven. I used to think it was more motivation through money or through objective circumstances. But it's actually just influenced by the people, which really just changed my perspective. Like, we can all change something in the music industry, in society, and in the way that conformity affects society. So that just made me feel like maybe there's a greater purpose to everyone individually.
Okay, thank you. Joey, if you had another team member, what other perspectives or limitations could they have researched that would have made a useful contribution to this project?
So I would have conducted more research in Isaac's viewpoint, and I would have done more research on the positive effects of conformity, because we did not include that in our presentation, and there could be some positive effects of conformity that would be applicable to our presentation, but we didn't include that or research that. So I would have gone out of the way to research that more and include, like we had the negatives, I would include the positives as well.
Great, thank you. Isaac, what is an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' individual reports that you decided to exclude from your presentation, and why?
Yeah, so in Faith's IRR, I saw that she made a good argument about conformity being as a result of social survival. So she was talking about how conformity is a result of fear and a result of the fight or flight instinct. And I thought we could have included that more, but we decided that it didn't really pertain to our lens of the music genre. But I thought that was super interesting, and the work she did looking at that was something that I thought was a good argument that we didn't include.
Thank you. And Alex, give one specific way your thinking has changed as a result of learning about another student's findings.
Well, I would definitely say my thinking has changed, especially with Joey's IRR, in the way that punk was influenced. Like Joey said, Blink-182, which was one of the artists he gave, was definitely piggybacked by a lot of different artists, because what they were doing was so unique at the time that other artists wanted to copy off of their success just to make a quick buck in reality and just put out quick and easy work just to make money. So.
All right, thank you. You guys?
Have you ever seen a horror movie or a movie with a monster where by the end of the story you fear and hate and dislike the monster so much that all you want to see is it annihilated, destroyed by the hero of the story? Well, Debbie Felton says that monsters often fill the role of antagonist, to be fought and conquered by heroes in a triumph of civilized man over irrational nature. And this concept has been for thousands of years. Our research question was, in what ways do depictions of monsters influence public attitudes and behaviors towards marginalized groups? We wanted to know how depictions of monsters in all different kinds of media portray and represent marginalized and minority groups, and how those depictions, mostly negative, have affected how other groups think about and treat those minority groups.
So following up on Julia's question, we wanted to date all the way back to ancient times where mythology was a huge thing and who was targeted at the time. So we see characters such as the goddess Hera and Medusa depict women as uncontrollable, irrational, and even dangerous. So as a result, they were seen as inferior to men and needed to be tamed. Fast forward to the Middle Ages, we see Catholicism dominate the known world at the time. So with the use of the devil, anyone outside of the white Catholic norm was usually the target of these depictions. The devil usually carried traits such as dark-skinned, animalistic, or even just a savage in general. That is why we see during the Age of Discovery that Native Americans were usually called red devils, because they carried many of these traits, according to them. And during the Renaissance, we see a complete 180 shift, as now the focus of monsters is towards Catholics because of the Reformation. So we see a clear example here of the sea bishop, who had very obvious traits of a Catholic bishop. So it's interesting to see how monsters kind of change what they represent over time. And fast forward to the 20th century, the rise of horror and sci-fi film is very important to see, since the target around this era was African Americans and Asians, and aliens, not due to their biology, but because of their unknown culture that closely resembled Asians and African Americans, were very easy to use stereotypes hiding behind aliens. And the reason why it's important to study this timeline is because it's like the blueprint of what we have today.
And leading into today, the history of iconic monsters such as vampires, witches, and the like is still remembered today and is expressed in a modern work. However, they're not the beasts that they used to be. Monsters continue to represent hateful ideologies such as misogyny, racism, and anti-Semitism, thanks to their past, but they also can uplift marginalized groups and convey the human condition. But they have evolved a lot, so nowadays the mythological stories that carried ancient Greeks and influence of religion and culture contain certain views of women, alienating them and reducing them as the means for sexual pleasure. The sirens of ancient Greece, who would sing their beautiful songs and were sailors to their demise, were the sensual beings reflected in the female devils of the Middle Ages. These female devils were genial and tempting. Devils, as Victoria Burns Price puts it, were the lesser, weaker demons who would thrive on seduction, and are the unfortunate evolution of the religious villainess as seen in the Siren and Medusa. Although these creatures still appear in modern media, a notable shift in the appearance of female monsters has occurred after contemporary women transformed the most recent iteration of the religious horror, the witch, into a symbol of feminism, according to feminist Katie Deepwell of K-Teen magazine. Similarly, the perceived devils found in the Native Americans caused them also to be reduced as savage, unruly beings during the Middle Ages, as Anna previously mentioned. While modern works such as Stephanie Meyer's Twilight continue to make monsters of these people, they've also been appreciated in the likes of James Cameron's Avatar, allowing their culture to be represented positively and their troubles proclaimed as a call to action by the viewer. By and large, the greatest shift in monsters today is their purpose. But throughout history, they were used to expose, belittle, and frighten people. And while much of this remains, monsters have shed their representation of societal fears, as seen in the aliens of Star Trek, warning Americans against communists and immigrants, and instead are used to convey the human condition as they did in the Renaissance.
So in response to this evolution, we made a couple of solutions that might help aid this problem. So the first solution is we would implement some educational programs into different high school curriculums just to make people aware of the history of monsters in different works of literature or movies or things like that. However, this might bring up some controversial topics, and there might be some room for misinterpretation by the students. And then our next solution is Hays Code. So in the past, Hays Code was basically a guideline for movies that they would need to get the seal of approval before it was released in theaters. So it would kind of ban different things like profanity or violence of any kind. And what we would do is we would change it into different like warnings about monsters and a guideline for just filmmaking. However, the downsides of this, their creative freedom could be limited. The filmmakers could not be able to do what they want to do in their work or movie, and it might not line up with the changed social norms. And our next solution that we came up with is that we would make non-metaphorical monsters instead of monsters with double meanings. And this would mean that the monsters would only be for entertainment purposes or for horror movies only. So how it would work is that experts would review the monsters to see if there's any likening to any sort of minority group. However, their creative freedom could be limited, again, just like Hays Code, and there could be questions over criteria over what a monster actually is. And our last solution that we came up with is making positive depictions of minority groups instead of negatives, which would kind of balance out the negative depictions of minority groups. This would show new perspectives rather than outdated stereotypes. However, the majority groups of America might flip, and those majorities might turn into the negative depictions. And people might just ignore it and not want to do it at all. So next, Kemi's gonna talk about what the best solutions are of this list.
Okay, so after looking at all of the possible solutions that Rachel addressed, we came to the conclusion that although none of these solutions are perfect, if we put together different parts of this solution and we put them into practice and just follow everything we can do possibly, a lot of improvements can be made to help our problem. We overall want to influence a more positive attitude towards these differences, and instead of discrimination that we have now, we would just want a more positive outlook. First, we would want to implement an educational program that makes students more aware of the undertones of discrimination in things they read, see, hear, and we just want to get rid of those undertones of discrimination that they're seeing from all of this through these monsters that they see in media. An example of this is Frankenstein. They learn, through this educational program, they would learn not only about the book, but they would also learn about the social and cultural implications of the way that this monster is treated and the ideas that reading this book puts into society in their everyday lives. Although having complete limitations on monsters is unreasonable and probably wouldn't happen, we want to add monsters to the MRPAA rating system to lessen the subconscious effects that they cause as well. Lastly, we want to encourage the positive depictions of minorities and marginalized groups to change people's mindsets towards them. There's no way to stop something negative without something positive, so we hope that this can be the positive that can combat the negative. And then Julia's going to deliver.
So it is obvious that these that there are a lot of solutions that are very tangible and real, and that this issue can be solved, but only if we put effort into it. Obviously, this problem has been going on for thousands of years, so it's not going to stop unless we do something about it. And we hope that these solutions can be implemented, and thank you so much.
Beautiful. So, Julia, what is a way in which your team's resolution makes you think differently about your own individual research?
So my individual research was on mythology, so like ancient times, and so the solution of education made me think about like why the monsters and myths were so perpetuated in ancient times, and like how limited the education was of that time, and so that was one of the reasons that mythology was so important to those people. They didn't have a lot of like scientific knowledge and things about, like, they didn't know about other groups of people and stuff like that, so that it just made me realize that that's like why that those monsters were so like ingrained in their society, is because of the lack of education.
Great, thank you. Anna, give one specific way your thinking changed as a result of learning about another student's findings.
So with Julia's final conclusion for her IRR, she wrote, if we don't find a solution now, we will be kind of destroyed just like Medusa's like victims. So that kind of made me think like, if we don't start doing something now, like the situation will just get worse, nothing will be solved. And yeah, that's kind of put everything into perspective about why this issue is so important. And now more than ever with the use of new technology and just communication in general.
Thank you. Evan, if you had another team member, what other perspectives or limitations could they have researched that would have made a useful contribution to your project?
If we had another member, I think that they should have researched like iconic horror literature and movies with things like Dracula and Frankenstein and whatever, to see how we came from those original ones, what they were representing, and how the more modern and like new and improved depictions kind of relates to how they were, and like kind of what the growth in between was, or if they're the same or worse.
Thank you. Rachel, what is an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' IRRs that you decided to exclude from the presentation, and why?
So in my research paper, I studied the Renaissance, and I noticed that a lot of depictions of monsters weren't metaphorical of like specific groups and minority groups, and instead they were kind of more symbolic of metaphorical groups or metaphorical like religion and society, like a reflection of society and our fears. Whereas like Julia and Kenley's work, they noticed a lot of like women, depictions of women as monsters, and Anna and Evan's work was more symbolic of like racial minorities as well as women.
Thank you. Kenley, describe an argument from one of your peers' individual reports, IRR, that made you think differently about your team's solution or conclusion.
So, as Rachel said in Julia's paper, she wrote a lot about women, like how they could be symbolic of monsters, especially like Medusa. And this kind of changed how I was thinking about our solution, because I know that a lot of people in this world today, they either think that like racism or feminism and stuff like that is a big problem. And to me, that's not as big of a problem, but when I read Julia's paper and I thought about her argument more and implemented it into my paper a little bit, I